What a Champions League semi-final between Europe's best, Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, where it ended in a 2-all draw. Bayern would be scratching their heads for not going with an goal advantage to the Bernabeu for the second leg. The XG between both teams were so tight and so was the possession. But let's start with Bayern Munich and Thomas Tuchel's plan to counter Real Madrid. So Bayern Munich lined up in their usual 4-2-3-1 formation. And while the German newspapers were constantly telling that Rafael Guerreiro will start, it was quite surprising Thomas Müller started. And it was surprising in Bayern's game plan too. Building up from the back, Bayern would split their two centre-backs Kim Min-jae and Eric Dyer. And with Neuer good at the ball, he acted as an additional centre-back against Madrid 4-4-2. However, getting outnumbered by Bayern's back three, Madrid front two of Bellingham and Vinicius looked to limit central progression by marking and cutting angles of Bayern's pivots. But thanks to Neuer and some clever movements from Bayern pivot, they were able to beat Madrid's front two, and in initial stages of the game, whenever Madrid perched high with Rodrigo, Vinicius and Bellingham, Bayern were still having numerical superiority and were easily beating Madrid's press. So Madrid adopted to a mid and lower block for most of the time. Going up front with the pivots, Tuchel, just like Arsenal game, pushed Goretzka little bit high, but only little bit and wide also. It was noticeable that distance between both Lamar and Goretzka was too much, and when Goretzka pushed higher, that means Real Madrid needed to adjust themselves for that single pivot threat, and Tuchel was most aggressive regarding his fullback. On both sides, Mazraoui and Kimmich were pushed too high, so that means Sané and Musiala operated in the half space. By operating in the half spaces, it gave Thomas Müller much high space to be with Harry Kane. But this was not only it. Thomas Müller rotated and had more freedom than any Bayern player. Sometimes he was seen at left, sometimes he was seen at right. Tuchel at first half basically planned to attack from the left hand side more. Probably that's because Madrid's right hand side didn't include Dani Carvajal in this game. That could be one reason, but mainly Madrid were too easily beaten because lack of trackbacks from their right hand side players. How many chances Bayern got in the first half only from attacking from the left hand side? Madrid having two centre back meant that if they didn't close down Mazraoui or their pivots didn't track Sané's run from the half space, it could punish them heavily. Later in the half, as Madrid settled themselves in, both Tchouaméni and Toni Kroos tracked whoever made that run in the half spaces. Also seeing Bayern's more threat coming from left wing, Ancelotti positioned Valverde much deep to defend. Even when Madrid were in possession, Valverde was playing as a right back sometimes, helping in build-up, and Vázquez was pushed high at the wing to avoid potential counter. But when Madrid got the lead, they were quite happy to defend deep, and this actually frustrated Bayern, so in the second half Tuchel brought on Rafael Guerreiro in place of Leon Goretzka, and this was the banker by Tuchel. Firstly, Müller was no longer playing up front with Kane. Müller was positioned little bit deep, and so was Rafael Guerreiro too. At the initial, both Müller and Guerreiro were shifted to half spaces. Lamar became the single pivot and Kimmich got deep, whereas Mazraoui still pushed up at the left wing. Sané shifted to right hand side, whereas Musiala to left wing. Both got wide, with Müller and Guerreiro supporting them in half spaces. Now Madrid had huge defensive problem after both goals by Bayern. Lucas Vázquez and Valverde were getting constantly cooked at the right hand side. Madrid even switched to a 4-5-1 from their 4-4-2. Also, later in the game, Tuchel placed Guerreiro as a pivot with Lamar, so to provide stability at the back. And Tuchel brought full back deep, so it also offered Bayern security against Madrid's counter. This plan exposed Madrid's potential weakness at wings by space given to Sané and Musiala, and especially Bayern link-up play at left. Also, Bayern's both goals can be great example of how Sané and Musiala exploited that space. Overload from Bayern's left with Mazraoui, Guerreiro and Musiala shook Madrid's defense. Now we look at Madrid's game plan, which is most of the time called in banter language vibe-based, so let's take a look at it. Bayern out of position shape was 4-4-2 with Kane and Müller higher up, but having just two men at midfield against Madrid 4 was a slight disadvantage for Bayern. But just as usual, Madrid pushed up their fullbacks high, with their two at the back build-up was supported by Toni Kroos dropping back at the left, or either Tchouaméni or Valverde would drop at right. But the main plan was to overload with Vinicius, Rodrigo and Mendy at the left, or sometimes Madrid did at the right overload with midfield, so that Rodrigo was free at left wing, getting all the space, And if we see Madrid's first goal, it was clear example of midfield overload. Here Vinicius does a double movement and you can say it's game mistakes. But here this midfield overload draws by a player and then Vinicius dropped and then spinned behind Kim Min-jae to score. Overall, Bayern impressed me the most, especially how Tuchel adapted to the situation and changed the game. However, the second leg is at the Bernabeu and Madrid are favourites to go through. But what did you make of the game? And can Tuchel's Bayern beat Ancelotti's Madrid at the Bernabeu? Comment below.